All right. Hi. Welcome back to the continuing lecture in return on investment. This is Dr. Jeff Hong. Um, so this is the seventh video in ROI, but actually from this video, we are tweaking the title a little towards the macroeconomics. Why? Well, if you think about return on investment, right? And I said at the beginning that ROI is the main reason you're investing, and the reason you're studying finance. I mean, among many other aspects of finance, the return on investment is the most interesting or most practical reason you are studying finance, because you want to know, if you invest in something, you want to know how to maximize your return. Of course, that there's a condition to that. There's a constraint. Constraint is the risk that comes along with it, because all investments inherently comes with a risk. And of course, we all want to maximize our return while keeping the risk at the minimum. In other words, while minimizing the risk, you want to maximize the return. Now, so what is then our question is, what is the low-risk investment opportunity? I mean, if all investment opportunities or investment instruments come with the risk, and it's, as I said, it's an inherent inherent part of the investing. If that's the case, you would like to invest, you would like to find investment and put your money into the investment opportunity with the minimum risk, right? Don't you think that would be a very, rational thinking? Yes, it's a rational thinking. Nobody wants to bear high risk. If possible, everyone wants to. But then the question is, if the risk is low, in general, the return will be low, right? Hence, the saying. Hence, the motto: maximum risk for minimum. Maximum return for minimum risk. It's actually not easy to achieve, because for most high returns, right? For most high return instruments, risk is also high. So the point is, for a given risk level, right? You need to pick for the same given risk level. And if there are alternatives, right? If there are multiple investment opportunities, you want to pick the one with the highest return, right? Well, of course, that's a very rational thinking. And for the given level of risk, yes, that is, basically a way to maximize the risk for while minimizing the risk. But anyway, then the question comes around. The question is, then, is there such a thing as zero risk instrument or riskless investment? Well, yes, there is. And this is something you already know, because at the beginning I used CD as an example. In other words, bank interest rate, right? And you might say, oh, bank interest rate is not so interesting. Of course, bank interest rate is not so interesting because I've been telling you these days, if you put your money into a savings account, you don't even get 0.1% a year. If you put your money into a CD, certificate of deposit, then you get about 1% a year. Mhm. And I also told you that there was a time when this risk-free rate was as high as like 15% a year, right? That was back in 1983, 84, 85. Um, but if you think about it, what CDs, let's not talk about the savings account because uh, it's not binding. Interest rate is not even binding. I mean, whatever they will pay you, whatever the market rate is. Okay, but let's talk about the CDs, certificate of deposit, and you put your money into a CD at something like $10,000, and 1% of 10,000 is only 100 a year, right? But currently, it's better than nothing, and that's the safest return on your money. Safest, meaning it's risk-free. And what risk are we talking about here? What risk? When we say risk, there are, at least four types of risks, right? Especially when lending money, right? Think about it. When you CD is lending, it's a loan you are giving to the bank, right? When you put your money in the bank account, you are passively becoming a lender. You're passively lending money, and the bank is becoming passively a borrower. You probably have never thought about that, but you are passively lending, and the bank is passively borrowing. And as long as banks are FDIC member, right, meaning they are FDIC insured, then there's no worry. You don't have to worry about losing your money. So the risk we are talking about here is default risk, right? Isn't that right? Think about it. When you are lending money, what is your biggest concern? Your biggest concern is whether the borrower will default on your loan, right? And that's called, default risk. And if you're lending to the bank, default risk is practically zero. That's why it's called risk-free return, right? If you get 1% on your CD, that's clearly risk-free return. Makes sense? And then we're going to talk about further about other types of risks, but the most fundamental risk is the default risk. Basically losing your money, right? Losing your money. And so I said, when you are lending, when you put your money in the bank, you're becoming a lender. So you're lending, bank is borrowing, but that 1% you're getting from the bank on your CD is called borrowing rate. Okay? You're lending to them, but why is it called the borrowing rate? Well, it's from the bank's perspective, right? Because the bank is the industry. The terminology is, determined by the industry. Okay? And from the bank's perspective, they are borrowing, so it is called the borrowing rate from their perspective. You can consider that as your lending rate, but they call the shot, right? It's not like you can negotiate that rate with the bank. I mean, if you don't like that rate, you'll just need to shop around, right? But since banking is a pretty, competitive industry, you won't find that much, different rate. It would all be around, 1%. At best, it would be 1.01 or 1.02 if 1% is the average. Then the worst case would be, worst offers would be like 0.97, 0.98. Makes sense? It's, very competitive industry. So the industry calls the shot, not you. So they call it borrowing rate because they are borrowing. And then when you borrow money from them, it's called lending rate because you are lending to them, right? And now let's think about it. Lending rate is supposed to be greater than the borrowing rate. Why? If the bank takes your $10,000, right? You put your $10,000 in the CD. The bank takes it from you, and what do they do with it? Of course, they will lend, right? Isn't that right? Um, the bottom line of banking, right? The bottom line. Banks make money by lending money. Isn't that right? They don't make money by borrowing money. They have to borrow first, of course, and then they will have to lend that money that they borrowed from you. And they make money by lending money. They will have to pay you money for borrowing. So they don't make money by taking the deposit. They make money by lending that deposit. So the business of banking lies in lending. Make sense? So if they lend, that lending rate must be greater than at least the rate that they are paying you, which is called borrowing rate. Make sense? They lend out your $10,000 and they charge, let's say, 5%. Okay? And then from that interest, they can pay you 1%. Make sense? The difference between the lending rate and borrowing rate is called the spread. Okay? And the spread is their cut. They're making that's right? It's their cut. So the term spread is not only used in the interest rate differential, right? It's also used in a wide range of financial situations, financial context. For example, if you ever, traveled overseas and, you exchange money, right? You exchange US dollars into a foreign currency. And let's say you travel to Europe, so you exchange US dollars for euros. And if the exchange rate is $2 per €1, right? Of course, that's not the reality. Reality is, I would say, about 1.2 US dollars per €1 or something like that. But just to make it simple, if €1 is $2, then you'll have to pay $200 to buy 100 euros. Make sense? And the rate that you're buying it is called, buying rate, right? When you buy. But when you sell, it's a different story. So you went to Europe, but you didn't use any, and you came back, but you didn't use any euros. You didn't use any cash because always the credit card, you get the best rate, best exchange rate on the credit card. So you just kept, 100 euros for emergency in cash, right? 100 euros in cash just for emergency. So you used mostly, credit card. You came back, you go back to the bank, you want to sell those euros and get, $200 back. But when you sell, the exchange rate is not $2 per euro, right? Exchange rate is like, 1.8, $1.80 per euro, or, and that's called what? Sell rate. When you sell, it's lower, right? Euro is cheaper when you sell. So what does that mean? The bank is making that 20 cents per euro, right? That's also called spread, the difference between the uh, buy and sell exchange rates. Okay. Also, if you ever bought something on eBay through auction, right? Uh, there are two types of prices in auction, right? There's buy and there's ask. Ask is the price that the sellers want. They are asking that price. And bid is the price that the buyers are bidding, right, for that merchandise. So bid is the buyer's price, ask is the seller's price. And usually ask is greater than the bid, right? Of course, the buyer always wants to pay the lowest, seller always wants to get the highest. So the difference between the ask and bid and ask is called also spread. Okay, so it's the term spread is used in multiple contexts. But again, it's not a difficult concept. You can always tweak it, to adapt it to appropriately to the different situation. Okay. So here's the thing: borrowing rate from the bank's perspective, when they borrowing rate is not that different. When you put your $10,000 in the bank, the rate that you get on your lending, $10,000 lending, is not that much different. It will be just about 1% anywhere. But when you borrow, the rate varies. Some people would have 3% for borrowing that money. Some people would have to pay 6% or even 10%. Why? Why is the lending rate so different? Lending meaning, from the bank's perspective, right? From your perspective, that's borrowing. So lending rates vary. So does it vary? Because of your risk level, your default risk. Make sense? Every individual has different default risk measured by their credit score. Okay? Every borrower. So if your credit rating is very high, your rate when you borrow will be very low, right? And if your credit score is bad, your borrowing rate will be very high because you represent higher risk to the lender. Make sense? Okay. So and it's not just the individuals. Think about it. Companies borrow too, right? Companies can borrow not only directly from the lenders, from the bank, but also companies can borrow directly from the lenders, anyone who wants to lend through the bond market, right? So all the companies, all the businesses have credit score, and that credit score is called actually credit rating. Credit rating. Even the governments do have credit rating. Okay, and the U.S. federal government also has credit rating, and U.S. federal government's credit rating is the highest. Okay, and we're going to get back to this later. Now, next, there are nominal interest rate and real interest rate. Before we talk about the nominal and real interest rate, let me quickly go over simple interest rate and compound interest rate. Remember in the house value example, the interest rate, there's a compounding going on, right? I told you in that example, there's a compounding going on in the house value. Why? Because the growth rate in the house value uh, compounds over time. Of course, it's not like interest rate. I mean, it's like interest rate. The only thing is that it's uneven, right? Every year it's uneven each year, right? It's different. But in case of interest rate, every year is the same, right? Once you get into a loan contract, the interest rate, if you have a loan for 10 years through these 10 years, right? Throughout these 10 years, your interest rate is locked into one rate. So that's like average, geometric average, right? Makes sense? Uh, so compound interest rate, right? Uh, and then there is simple interest rate. Now, I probably mentioned also that simple interest rate is not used in the long-term financial market. Okay, I mean, simple interest rate is uh, uh, the rate used in the short-term financial market. Short-term financial market is called money market, and long-term financial market is called uh, capital market. And long-term fund is called capital, basically. Short-term fund is not called capital. And what is the difference between short-term and long-term? It's arbitrary. The line between short-term and long-term can be drawn arbitrarily. 1 year, right? Anything that has maturity, any loan that has maturity, or any fund, any capital that has any fund that has maturity longer than 1 year is called long-term capital. And the lending under 1 year, if the maturity is under 1 year, is called short-term fund, right? So if you're lending for 90 days, 60 days, 120 days, like 3 months, 6 months, 180 days, anything under 1 year, any time frame under 1 year. In that case, interest is not compounding; it's simple interest. Okay, that means for 1 year, simple interest is not used for longer than 1 year. But to give you a simple example, if we use simple interest for even long term, for 3 years, if you lend $10,000 at 10% simple interest rate, at the end of the first year there will be $1,100. I mean $1,100. In the second year there will be $1,200. At the end of the third year there will be $13,000, right? Because each year is 10% of the principal. A simple interest rate. But we know, we use compounding, right, for long-term financial market. So at the end of the first year, there will be $11,000. That's correct. But at the end of the second year, it isn't $12,000, but it will be $12,100. Why? Because of compounding. At the end of the first year, there's $11,000. That $11,000 works like the principal in the year 2 and earns 10%. So 10% of 11,000 is 1,100. So by the end of the year 2, you will have $12,100. Right? Makes sense? Then at the beginning of year 3, 12,100 is sitting there, working as like the principal, and then earns 10% again, which is then $1,210. So by the end of year 3, the amount will be greater than simply 13,000. So we have so another way of classifying interest is, simple interest rate and compound interest rate. Now, there is also not, we can classify interest rate as real interest rate and nominal interest rate. Nominal interest rate versus real. And what is nominal and what is real? Now, nominal interest rate is the interest rate, the quoted, stated interest rate. Literally, when the bank says our interest rate is, we pay you 5%, right? If you put your money in the CD, we pay you 5% a year. Okay, that's nominal interest rate. But then so you will have nominally 1 year later, you will have $10,500 1 year later. 10,500, right? Makes sense. 10,500 1 year later. Let's make it, just to make it simple. Let's assume 10%. I mean, it's easier to work with 10%. So then 1 year later, you will have $11,000 in your bank account, right? Because CD interest rate is that. But this $11,000 will be worth, I mean, the purchasing power, think about the purchasing power of $11,000. I mean, 1 year ago, when you had $10,000, and let's say the purchasing power of $10,000 was at, let's say, 10,000 bottles of water. Let's say water is $1. Okay, a bottle of water is $1. And 1 year, and so 1 year later, if the price level hasn't changed, the price level across the economy hasn't changed, the water will still be $1. And with $11,000, you will be able to buy 11,000 bottles of water. In terms of purchasing power, your $11,000 has exactly 10% more purchasing power than $10,000. Make sense? And it's because your money increased by 10%, right, over 1 year. And as long as price level in the economy remain the same, the purchasing power will be 10% more. But what if there has been 10% inflation? What if there has been 10% inflation during this 1 year period? Now, 1 year later, nominally, you will have $11,000 in your bank account, but how many bottles of water can you buy? And remember, I said inflation was 10%. There has been 10% inflation. What does that mean? Everything is 10% more expensive. Then what would be the price of the bottle of water now? It would be $1.10. Isn't that right? But then let's think about it. Nominally, you have $11,000, but in terms of purchasing power, how many bottles of water can you buy? Can this $11,000 buy? Isn't that only, still, 10,000 bottles? Just like a year ago, with $10,000, you could buy 10,000 bottles of water because water was, a bottle of water was $1. But now, because the bottle of water is $1.10, even with $11,000, you can only buy 10,000 bottles. So in other words, in terms of purchasing power, although you have $11,000, the purchasing power of $11,000 is just the same as $10,000 a year ago. Make sense? So what happened? That 10% inflation has completely wiped out 10% purchasing power of your money. So that 10% nominal interest rate is wiped out. Okay? So what is the real interest rate then? The real interest rate is 0. because the nominal interest rate of 10% is wiped out by inflation of 10%. So what is the real interest rate? Real interest rate is, this R represents real interest rate, I represents nominal interest rate, pi represents inflation. So that means nominal interest rate is real interest rate plus inflation. Or if you solve it for real interest rate, R, then R equals I minus pi. In other words, real interest rate is nominal interest rate adjusted for inflation. That's what is meant by real. All right, we'll have to cut off the video here. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you